Alright, it's a 12-inch PvPness, and we're gonna go over rank play with Pantheon. So, in your game, your Pantheon, you're going top lane. You've got your enemy, mid lane, bot lane, and jungle, which you never know where they are, unless you have wards. You've got your jungle, your mid lane, and your bot lane. Okay? Playing Pantheon is like playing chess. You are essentially the pawn, the first developing piece. Now, later on, if the pawn does really well and gets to the end of the board, the pawn could be anything that it wants, as is Pantheon. If he can transition himself into the late game, he's an extremely powerful player. However, if he can't, at the end of the game, he's just a pawn and everybody else, are extremely important pieces. So, your bot lane, your ADC is the queen, alright? Your support, more of like a bishop. Your jungle's the knight. Your opponent never really knows where he is. Mid lane's the rook. Slide him up and down. He can cover a lane. He can gank. He can apply a lot of pressure. Okay? Your pawn. Enemy top laner might be a higher value piece than you, but if you can't develop them early, they're not worth as much as you are. So no, your Q, you're going to poke them down quite a bit. You might get a solo kill. You might even get killed. At the end of the day, you're still a pawn. If your bot lane is getting creamed, you can't sacrifice your queen unless it involves winning the game. Okay? So if your bot lane is getting creamed and it doesn't look like your comp can beat their comp, beeline bot. Going straight to bot lane and you're ulting. You're ulting their bot lane 1v2 to try and clean up, because if you don't do it, you lose instantly. Games are decided with Pantheon probably in the first 5-10 minutes of the game. If you see like a clear distinction on who has a lead, chances are that person will win. And if your team is at a severe disadvantage, it is up to you to make the plays to get them there. If you're ulting bot lane and helping out your pieces and developing them, that is how you're gonna lead them to victory. Because you are only the early game, and barely the early game at that. Your E, you've got your AoE, your stun bot, and you've got your kill secured. But that's all you've got. Your ult doesn't do anything nuts for the fight. It's a little bit of mobility. Maybe mid game you can get a couple picks with it. But everybody else, including the enemy top laner, is gonna have an ult that changes the game every fight, which you don't. So this relies on you not ulting the lane to get CS, or using it as a teleport. Occasionally that's acceptable, but it's rare. But it involves you either ulting mid to try and snowball your mid, so your mid can in turn snowball your bot, or snowballing your bot simply so you can just win the game. So it is okay to give up a lot of your tower, or even your tower. Give up 4 or 5 waves so that you can kill these two. Drake, first tower, it is all worth it. Because at the end of the day, your CS and your gold does not matter as much as your team's. Pantheon is still going to do Pantheon things if he's got 50 CS. If he's got 100 CS at 20 minutes, he's still going to do the same thing. Maybe he'd do it better if he had more CS, but his team wouldn't be able to help as much. Because you can't always rely on your team being good, so you have to make them good. Alongside of that, I mean, ranked play is simply, either trying not to die or exploiting your opponent's weaknesses and trying to get a solo kill. 2v2ing top lane with your jungler is always a good idea, because generally you will always win the 2v2, because Pantheon is a very strong early game. Those 2v2s can scale your jungler. Getting your jungler good in XP and ahead of the enemy jungler is also very important, because he makes it so that you don't have to be the one to roam. If you want to catch a couple waves and your jungler's fed as fuck, or if your jungler has more XP and is just way stronger than the other jungler, it's free range over his camps, over their camps, he's going to gank for you, and you don't have to gank. But it all revolves around you getting your team ahead. If Pantheon's 20-0 and the rest of his team is like 0-4, you're going to lose, because Panth can't 1v5. Maybe early game, maybe at 10 minutes, you man drop on 5 of them and kill them all. But, 20 minutes, 22, 25, when you're slotted to win the game, you're not going to be able to pull through. You're gonna start falling off at that point. You're just not gonna be as strong as you were. Usually you're not gonna get a 15-minute surrender, so it all involves your transition to the mid game, which if you're not very experienced with, is gonna involve you getting your team ahead so that they can transition for you and they can eventually carry you. Hyper late game, your ADC, you're basically another support. You know, they might have an assassin in the jungle, an assassin mid, they might have Kaisa, and you know, they're all going to be jumping on your ADC. And instead of ulting into their team, which you shouldn't do at a certain point in the game just because it's too risky, uh, you'll play back, you'll use your point click stun, which will, you know, 100% hit anybody, and then you'll use your damage as peel. So you can just nuke whoever sits on your ADC and let your ADC have free range over the enemy team. Generally, for this kind of strategy, you're going to need like either a super fed ADC or a tanky jungle. But you know, I mean, you let your mid do basically the job you were doing earlier, you know, catching people out and poking. And yeah, generally that's how Pantheon works in rank play.